Let's start off with the news. Washington is talking about a $1 trillion infrastructure plan. 5G is going to be part of that. How quickly do you see that money coming through and being spent? How quickly could it happen? And what does it mean for your company?
Thanks. It's great to be with you. What you see is 5G is increasingly viewed as a critical national infrastructure. And I guess with the current ongoing crisis with COVID-19, we really see the criticality of connectivity. So, of course, we welcome spendings into the digital infrastructure in the broad sense, but also in 5G as we're participants, as you said. It's a little bit hard to know how this is going to play out. But what we see is countries like the US, but also China, are actually accelerating investments in the digital infrastructure, as that's going to be kind of a competitiveness of the future. So I think what we're seeing here is a good step by the US and other countries as they are more insightful in what's going to be needed for the future. But how it exactly pans out, I don't really know yet.
Has the trajectory, though, of growth in 5G changed with the pandemic? For example, AT&T, ton of debt, cutting costs, might infringe on their ability to ramp up. China's got a lot of other problems they have to worry about. How has that changed?
It's a fair question, Alex. But what you see is you see a little bit slower penetration in some countries, or slower growth in some countries. But you also see that being outweighed by much faster adoption in other countries. So if you take, for example, China, just China Mobile today has 50 million subscribers on 5G already. And they are further accelerating the build out of the 5G networks. So overall, we actually see 5G to be the fastest growing cellular technology ever, growing much faster than 4G. As well, and by the way, as any of the former Gs. So we don't, of course, it's going to have some impact from COVID-19, but the overall demand for a digital infrastructure will grow faster as more and more people work from home or in remote work areas.
Mr. Ekholm, you bring up China, and that takes us in the direction of Huawei and a number of different kind of questions around Huawei. Clearly, growth in Asia of 5G is going to be pretty explosive. We've certainly seen some data to suggest that. But what I'm wondering is, if you do better in markets like the United States, where Huawei is no longer able to compete, does that mean, is it a zero-sum game? Do you lose out in China and Asia because there is a greater focus in Huawei there? Is it a zero-sum game, or do you think you can win on both sides?
What we did, we decided a few years ago to double down on 5G, and we dramatically increased our R&D expenses and investments in 5G. And we've grown our total R&D by almost 30% over the past 3 years. A lot of that geared towards getting a very competitive and technology-leading portfolio. And what we feel today is that we are very competitive. We were the first on 4 continents to launch 5G. So we were in the first networks. We're in the first big rollouts in Korea and Switzerland. And now we are a key partner in the Chinese rollout as well. So we feel we have a chance to compete across the world, and we are winning market share across the world. So we feel, based on the technology and our service leadership, we can actually get market shares. It's always a competitive market. It will be a competitive market. So, it's always about winning in front of the customer, and hoping for something else, I think, is a bit of a waste of time. It's much better to do what you can impact in front of the customer.
So, talking about market share, I mean, clearly Ericsson and Nokia were the big beneficiaries when Huawei was banned in the US. If the same thing happens in the UK, though, will you be able to ramp up your supply chain to meet the kind of demand if Huawei is kind of given the boot?
To speculate about what's going to happen in the UK, I think takes it too far and is outside of my area. But what we have done in the supply chain is actually we started preparing for gaining market share already in 2017-18. So we have prepared with our manufacturing footprint and sourcing to be able to capture bigger volumes. So that was always part of our strategic plan. And you can, for example, see that when the COVID-19 lockdowns happened around the world, we have had very little product supply issues. Very little to nothing, actually. It's a lot of effort done by our people in supply, of course, and production, but they've been able to keep that humming as before. So in reality, we believe we're well positioned to ramp up further if that is needed. So we're open for business for all customers that feel we are an alternative vendor, and we think that we're in good shape to do so.
How much extra kind of capacity could you produce, though? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? You talk about the ability to ramp up, but this is complicated equipment that you are producing with a significant supply chain. How quickly could you ramp up that production? How far could you ramp up that production in terms of being able to provide the extra capacity that could be needed by countries if they decide that they're either going to go with Nokia or with Ericsson? There are two choices. Cost is going to be a factor, but the ability to supply quickly is going to be part of that equation as well. How quickly can you make this happen?
The limiting factor is not our own manufacturing capacity at all. That's relatively easy to scale. So, for example, when we built a factory in the US, that was done in a few months, and that was not done in a particularly high pace. So our own production capacity is not the big issue here. As a matter of fact, the bigger issue is, of course, the supply chain and getting hold of components and critical components. And lead times here varies a bit. It can be, it can be up to a couple of months for certain components. We have already built inventory of those components because we learned from the semiconductor scarcity or scarce supply in 2018. So we are well prepared, but that's where the restrictions would be. So of course, if you have a massive change in supply, we would have some months of lead time. But I do not think it's particularly a big question.
The other interesting part of this whole conversation is the role of the U.S. government within, say, Ericsson. There was talk about U.S. institutions or U.S. government taking a stake in the company. Would you ever want that? Under what conditions might that be appealing?
I think we're a private enterprise. I believe in private enterprises. We are, when you operate outside of the government's control, I think you're the most innovative, you're the most efficient. So, I think we have a fairly good ownership structure, and we should be able to push ahead on that. And being linked too much to one country, I think can have other implications. And I believe as long as the owners think this is a good ownership structure, me as a manager, I think it's great.
What did you make of Margrethe Vestager today announced that Europe is going to take a more robust approach to China and potentially other countries looking to take stakes or buy European technology. Do you welcome that?
I think it's a geopolitical question. I think the governments and the politicians should deal with that. But I think as an enterprise, what you can expect from the regulators or the politicians, the legislators, is actually to provide a good environment for the companies to operate in, to invest in. And take, for example, the current situation with 5G rollout in Europe. What we have is a massive uncertainty. What's going to happen on the vendor landscape? What's going to happen with rollouts in countries? What's going to happen with frequency auctions, etc. Those are much more important to kind of fix for the regulators to create a certain investment environment And then we are going to see operators invest, and then we can thrive as companies as well. So I think, whether they should be involved in taking ownership stakes or not, I actually think I would be healthier not to have them involved, but to rather create a good investment climate for the companies and good investment environment for the companies. And here I think the political system is not doing European enterprises a big favor, actually.